The encounter. Ethan adjusted the colorful jars of spices on his stall, their scents blending into an enticing aroma that wafted through the busy marketplace. The human colony was alive with chatter, the air buzzing with the sounds of trade. The market, a fusion of alien and human cultures, was one of the few places where beings from different worlds gathered without hostility. He was about to pack up for the day when a strange figure caught his eye. She stood a few feet away, cloaked in a shimmering fabric that reflected the sunlight in hues of silver and green. Her face was partially hidden, but Ethan could see the faint glow of her blue eyes beneath the hood. The figure hesitated, looking at his stall with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Ethan had seen many aliens in his years of trading, but something about this one was different. She moved with a kind of elegance, but her body language screamed uncertainty. "Looking for something special?" Ethan asked, his voice warm and welcoming. He gestured toward the neatly arranged jars. "I've got spices from all over the galaxy, guaranteed to add a little flavor to your life." The figure stepped closer, her movements cautious. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but layered with an otherworldly tone. "What is flavor?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "You've never heard of flavor." He chuckled, though he quickly realized she wasn't joking. "It's the way food tastes. Spices make it better, more exciting." Her glowing eyes scanned the jars, landing on one labeled chili powder. She pointed at it. "This one. It's bright." Ethan picked up the jar, holding it out for her to inspect. Chili powder. A human favorite. It's spicy, might even make your tongue tingle a bit. The alien girl tilted her head, her curiosity growing. "May I try it?" Ethan hesitated. He had heard stories about certain alien species having strange reactions to human foods. Some couldn't handle the richness, others found the chemicals toxic. But this girl seemed so eager, her glowing eyes fixated on the jar like it held the secrets of the universe. "Just a tiny bit," he said, opening the jar and dipping the tip of a small spoon into the reddish powder. He handed it to her, watching as she examined it closely. Then, with a decisive motion, she touched the powder to her tongue. The reaction was immediate. Her glowing eyes widened, and her body shuddered as a spark of light flickered across her skin. She let out a soft gasp, the sound somewhere between surprise and delight. "What is this feeling?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan laughed nervously. "That's the chili talking. It's spicy. It heats you up. It's supposed to be a kick." The girl stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she reached for the jar and took another small pinch, tasting it again. This time, her reaction was even stronger. Her glowing skin began to shimmer faintly, like stars twinkling under her cloak. "This is incredible," she murmured. "I feel alive." Ethan scratched the back of his head, unsure whether to feel proud or alarmed. "Glad you like it, but you might want to take it slow. Too much could, be a bit overwhelming." The girl looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with newfound intensity. "More. I need to try more." She reached for another jar, this one containing turmeric, a golden spice that Ethan often used to impress his alien customers. Before he could stop her, she opened it and took a small taste. Her reaction was different this time. Her eyes fluttered shut, and a soft hum escaped her lips. "It's warm, gentle," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, turmeric's great for that," Ethan said, watching her with a mix of fascination and concern. "But you might want to pace yourself. Your body's not used to this stuff." The girl opened her eyes, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of emotion he couldn't quite place. Was it joy? Longing? Whatever it was intense. "I've never felt anything like this before," she said. "Everything in my world is bland, cold. But this," she held up the jar of chili powder, "this is life." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. He didn't know much about her species, but her words hinted at a life devoid of sensation. He couldn't imagine a world without flavor, without the little joys that made existence interesting. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to shift the conversation. "Syra," she said, her voice still tinged with wonder. "And you?" "Ethan, spice trader, at your service." He gestured to the jars with a smile. "If you're that impressed by chili powder, wait till you try the cinnamon." Before Syra could respond, a low murmur spread through the marketplace. Ethan glanced around, noticing other aliens eyeing Syra with suspicion. One elderly merchant muttered something in a language Ethan didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Disapproval. Syra seemed oblivious, her attention fixed on the spices. But Ethan felt a knot of unease forming in his chest. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You should be careful. Not everyone here is as open-minded about humans or our spices." Syra looked at him, her glowing eyes unwavering. "I don't care. I want to feel more." Ethan sighed, knowing he was getting pulled into something far bigger than he'd anticipated. "All right, Syra, but you better stick close. Things are about to get interesting." And with that, the encounter that would change both their lives began. The first taste. Syra's glowing blue eyes were locked onto the vibrant array of spices on Ethan's stall, her earlier hesitation now replaced by an almost childlike curiosity. Her slender fingers traced the edges of the jars, pausing at one filled with golden brown flecks labeled cinnamon. Ethan watched her with a mixture of fascination and concern. He had never seen someone react to spices the way she had, and certainly not with such intensity. "You're really not from around here, are you?" Ethan asked, his tone light but probing. Syra turned to him, the shimmer of her cloak reflecting the late afternoon sun. "My people do not use such things. Food is for sustenance only. Flavor, as you call it, is unnecessary." Yet now, her voice trailed off as she picked up the cinnamon jar. "Now I see what we've been missing." Ethan chuckled nervously, trying to mask his unease. "Well, cinnamon's one of the gentler ones. Sweet, warm, great for desserts. You should try." "Wait, not like that." Before he could stop her, Syra opened the jar and dipped her finger directly into the powdered spice. She brought it to her lips with a deliberate slowness, as though savoring the anticipation. The moment the cinnamon touched her tongue, her body stiffened, and a faint golden glow began to pulse beneath her skin. Her reaction was immediate and intense. Her glowing eyes fluttered shut, and a low, musical hum escaped her throat, almost like a purr. The pulsing glow spread outward, illuminating the edges of her face beneath the hood. This is... She struggled for words, her usual calm demeanor completely shattered. "It's like warmth, but not from the outside. It's inside me, filling me. I can't explain it." Ethan took a step back, alarmed by her response. "Whoa, hey, are you okay? That's just cinnamon. It's not supposed to do whatever this is." Syra opened her eyes, the glow now steady and bright. "Is this what humans feel all the time? This spark of life?" Ethan scratched the back of his head, unsure how to respond. "I mean, I guess. It's not usually that dramatic, though." She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the air like music. "No wonder humans are so unpredictable." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Unpredictable. That's one way to put it." As Syra reached for another jar, a small crowd began to gather. Nearby merchants and shoppers, both human and alien, whispered among themselves, their eyes drawn to the glowing alien woman and her strange behavior. Ethan could hear snippets of their murmurs. "Is she one of the Zoltha? They're not supposed to eat human food. Look at her glow. It's unnatural. She's playing with dangerous things." Syra seemed oblivious to the growing attention. Her focus was entirely on the spices. She picked up a jar of paprika, its bright red powder catching her eye. "What does this one do?" Ethan hesitated, glancing nervously at the crowd. "But it's smoky, A little spicy. Great on roasted stuff. But maybe we should. Before he could finish, Xyra opened the jar and inhaled deeply. The effect was instantaneous. Her glow flared, and a crackling sound filled the air, like tiny bursts of static electricity. A gasp rippled through the crowd as Xyra let out a startled laugh, her body trembling with what could only be described as joy. "It's like fire," she exclaimed, her voice carrying an edge of excitement. "But it doesn't burn. It awakens." Ethan grabbed the jar from her hands, his concern outweighing his amusement. "Okay, that's enough for now. You're causing a scene." Xyra looked around for the first time, noticing the gathering crowd. Her glow dimmed slightly, and her expression shifted to one of curiosity. "Why are they staring?" "Probably because you look like a walking light show," Ethan muttered. He stepped in front of her, trying to shield her from the onlookers. "We should get out of here before someone starts asking questions." Just as he began packing up his stall, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Halt! What's going on here?" Ethan turned to see a group of alien enforcers pushing through the crowd. Their armor gleamed under the sunlight, and their stern faces left no room for negotiation. The lead enforcer, a towering figure with ridged horns, pointed directly at Xyra. "You," he barked. "Zolthans are forbidden from consuming human substances. Step away from the stall." Xyra's glow faded entirely, replaced by a look of confusion. "I didn't know." "Save your excuses," the enforcer snapped. He turned to Ethan. "And you, selling restricted goods to an alien. That's a serious offense." Ethan raised his hands defensively. "Hey, hold on. She came to me. I didn't force her to try anything." The enforcer sneered. "Ignorance is no defense. Both of you will come with us for questioning." The crowd murmured in anticipation, some aliens stepping back as the enforcers advanced. Xyra's eyes darted to Ethan, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "What do we do?" Ethan glanced around, his mind racing. Running would only make things worse, but surrendering meant risking more than just a fine. He leaned closer to Xyra and whispered, "Follow my lead." Without warning, Ethan grabbed a jar of black pepper and hurled it at the ground. The jar shattered, releasing a cloud of fine powder into the air. The enforcers coughed and stumbled, momentarily blinded. "Run," Ethan shouted, grabbing Xyra's arm and pulling her through the crowd. She followed without hesitation, her cloak billowing behind her as they ducked into a narrow alley. As the sounds of pursuit faded behind them, Xyra turned to Ethan, her glowing eyes wide with wonder. That was exhilarating. Ethan groaned, already regretting his decision. "Great. Glad you're having fun. Now we're both fugitives." Xyra smiled, her glow returning. "It's worth it. This taste of life. I won't let them take it from me." Ethan sighed, leading her deeper into the maze of alleys. "Something tells me this is just the beginning." The awakening. By the time they reached the hidden spice lab, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the market in shades of gold and purple. Ethan led Xyra through a series of dark alleys, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the enforcers would be searching the streets, but this hidden spot, buried deep in the heart of the city, was one of the few places where he could lay low and think. Xyra, for her part, was almost eerily calm. Her blue glow was faint now, a soft shimmer under her skin, as though the spice-induced euphoria was slowly fading. Still, she was clearly caught up in the lingering sensation. "I've never felt so alive," she murmured, her voice tinged with wonder. She glanced around at the worn walls of the alley, the flickering neon lights casting strange shadows. "What is this place? It feels different." Ethan unlocked a hidden door tucked between two crumbling buildings, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with more jars of spices than he could count. Some of them were rare, imported from planets on the edge of the galaxy. Others were mixtures he had crafted himself, designed to amplify certain emotional states or even to heal wounds in ways normal medicine couldn't. "This is my workshop," Ethan said, stepping inside. "It's where I experiment, try out new recipes, figure out how different spices interact with each other." He paused, eyeing the alien girl as she wandered deeper into the room. "And where I keep things hidden." Zaira touched the edge of a jar labeled coriander, her fingers tracing the intricate pattern on the glass. "This place smells like possibility. Everything here feels alive." Ethan closed the door behind them, making sure it was securely locked. "It's more than just smell, Zaira. It's about what the spices can do, what they can bring out in you." She turned, her glowing eyes meeting his, the intensity behind them almost palpable. "Bring out in me? What do you mean?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, unsure how to explain something that had only begun to make sense to him in recent years. "I've been studying spices for a long time, not just to cook with them, but to understand how they affect emotions, how they connect people across different worlds. Some species can't handle certain flavors, some can't feel them at all. But you're different." Zaira blinked, a puzzled expression crossing her face. "Different? How?" Ethan hesitated. "I think you're starting to unlock something in yourself. A sensation, a connection to things your species hasn't experienced for generations. The spices, they don't just stimulate your senses, they're reawakening something inside you, something deep." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "But why? What's happening to me?" He stepped closer, his voice softening. "I don't know, but I think you're tapping into something that your people once understood. Something that was lost." Zaira looked at him for a long moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, slowly, she took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something that could change everything. "What do you mean by lost?" Ethan motioned for her to sit at a small table in the center of the room, a few jars of spices laid out in front of them. "You felt it, right? This fire inside you. It's not just the spices. It's the sensation of being alive, of experiencing something you've never known. I think your species, your ancestors, used to live with this. They didn't just eat for survival. They ate to feel, to connect with each other, to feel joy, pleasure, even pain sometimes." Zaira stared at him, her lips slightly parted. "But why did we stop? Why didn't we keep it?" Ethan sat across from her, his fingers lightly tapping the surface of the table. "Maybe because it was too much, too overwhelming. Your people might have learned to suppress these emotions, to numb themselves in order to survive the harsh conditions of your homeworld. They built a society that focused on efficiency, on logic. But spices remind you of something more." For the first time, Zaira's voice shook with uncertainty. "You mean I've been wrong all this time?" "No," Ethan said quickly, shaking his head. "Not wrong. Just disconnected." Zaira placed her hand over her chest, feeling the steady pulse of energy beneath her skin. "This feeling, I don't know how to control it. It's like a storm, tearing through me, taking over." Ethan watched her closely, his heart heavy with a strange mix of pity and admiration. He could see the conflict within her, the battle between her inherited instincts and the rush of new emotions. "You don't have to control it, Zaira. Not yet. Just let it be. Let the spices open you up. Let them show you what you've been missing." Zaira looked at the jars in front of her. Each one was a mystery, an unopened door to another experience. She slowly reached for the jar of chili powder, the same one she tasted earlier. "I want to try again," she whispered, almost to herself. "I want to see what happens." Ethan didn't stop her this time. He only watched as she picked up the jar, her fingers trembling with anticipation. She opened it slowly, inhaling the sharp scent of the powder. Her skin began to glow again, faintly at first, and then with greater intensity. Her breath quickened as she tasted it. Just a small amount, this time. But it was enough. The effect was immediate. The glow around her intensified, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. This time, it wasn't just warmth. It was an explosion, a flood of sensations that overwhelmed her mind and body. She gasped, her eyes wide, as a flood of memories, emotions, and visions raced through her mind. It wasn't just the spices, it was everything she had never known. The taste, the warmth, the connection to something bigger than herself. She saw flashes of her people, their ancient rituals, their lost way of life, before they chose to shut themselves off from such feelings. She cried out, a mix of shock and revelation. Her body trembled, and for a moment, it seemed as though she might collapse from the intensity of it all. Sarah, Ethan's voice broke through the storm. He stood, rushing to her side, his hand resting gently on her arm. Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide and full of emotion. I understand now. This is what I've been searching for. This is what we lost. Ethan nodded slowly, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It's just the beginning. You're awakening to something incredible, something your people need. But you're not alone, Zaira. I'll help you figure it out. Zaira smiled, her glow steady now, a sign that she was beginning to accept the new path ahead. Thank you, Ethan, for showing me everything. As the room fell silent, the weight of their conversation settled in. Zaira's awakening was far from over, but it had begun. And with it, a new journey was about to unfold. The danger. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the walls of the hidden spice lab, casting long shadows across the floor. The air smelled of herbs and spices, but something heavier hung in the atmosphere, a feeling that this fragile safety wouldn't last for long. Zaira stood by the small window, her glowing eyes scanning the streets below. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, sudden realizations, overwhelming emotions, and the sense that everything she had known was being appended. The spices had done more than just awaken her senses. They had unlocked memories, feelings, and desires she hadn't known existed. But with those unlocked doors came consequences. "What's happening to me, Ethan?" she asked, her voice low, her fingers tracing the edge of a spice jar absent-mindedly. Ethan, seated on an old crate, glanced at her. He could see the intensity in her eyes. She was no longer the shy, curious girl who had wandered into his stall. Zaira was changing, and fast. "It's like I said," he replied quietly. "You're reconnecting with something your people buried long ago. You're learning to feel again. But at what cost?" Zaira's voice was edged with uncertainty. "I can't stop it. I can't control it. Every spice, every taste, it takes me further. What if I lose myself?" Ethan stood and walked over to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You won't lose yourself. You're just rediscovering who you are. It might take time to figure out how to live with all of it. But I'll help you. We'll figure it out." Zaira turned to him, her glowing eyes searching his face, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. "But what about them?" She nodded toward the door, her expression hardening. "The enforcers. They won't stop until they find us." Ethan sighed. The enforcers were becoming a serious problem. He'd known they would be after Zaira once she started glowing like that, but he hadn't expected them to come this quickly. The spice market was a small community, but it was tightly connected, and word spread fast. The authorities had already started to investigate his background, his trade, and now Zaira. He moved away from her and began pacing the room, hands running through his hair in frustration. "I've dealt with them before, but this is different. They'll be relentless." "What do they want?" Zaira asked, her voice cold, her earlier vulnerability replaced with a dangerous edge. "They don't care about you, Zaira," Ethan said, his tone sharp. "They care about control, about keeping species like yours from stepping out of line. The enforcers have their rules, and anyone who breaks them is a target." Zaira clenched her fists, her glowing skin flaring brightly in response to her rising anger. "I will not be controlled. Not anymore." Ethan turned to face her, a warning in his voice. "Be careful, Xyra. If you let that anger guide you, it'll get us both caught." But Xyra's gaze was unwavering. "I've been controlled my whole life. Told what to do, how to act, how to feel. No more. I've tasted freedom. I've tasted life." She looked down at the spice jars on the table, her fingers lightly grazing the labels. "This is who I am now." Ethan could see the storm brewing within her. He had helped awaken something in her, something that was dangerous and beautiful, both at the same time. The old suppressed instincts of her people were rising to the surface, and he wasn't sure whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. There was a loud thud on the door, followed by, "Fine," Garek called out, his tone growing impatient. "We'll search elsewhere, but don't think you've won, Ethan. We'll find her. We always do." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, but the moment the footsteps retreated, Xyra pulled away from him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fury. "They're after me, and they'll never stop. I can't keep hiding." The stillness in the air felt suffocating. The fear was thick now, a weight that settled in the pit of Tyra's stomach. But even beneath the fear, there was something else, something strange, but exciting. She had tasted freedom. She had experienced the rush of emotions the spices had awakened in her. And now she craved more. But she was beginning to wonder if that craving, that hunger, was going to consume her, if the life she was starting to embrace would drag her into something darker, something more dangerous than she could control. A distant cry pierced the air. Xyra's head jerked toward the noise, her body tensing instinctively. It wasn't a human voice. It was one of the enforcers, shouting orders. They were getting closer. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her into motion. Now or never. Without another word, they pushed through the back door, emerging into a narrow alley that led deeper into the city. They kept their heads low, moving swiftly, making as little noise as possible. Xyra's glowing skin remained dim, but her heightened awareness of her surroundings made every step feel like a dance, a balancing act between danger and escape. They weaved through the back streets, ducking behind crates and buildings, avoiding the main thoroughfares where the enforcers could be lurking. As they moved, Xyra couldn't help but notice the difference in how she perceived the world now. The spices had opened her senses to everything around her. Every corner held a new possibility. Every sound felt sharper, more vivid. She could feel the hum of the city's energy in her bones, the pulse of life in the air itself. It was intoxicating, and the more she felt it, the harder it became to control. They reached a narrow bridge that crossed a fast-moving stream, its waters churning beneath them. Ethan paused for a moment, scanning the area. His eyes darted around, checking for any signs of pursuit. The coast seemed clear for now, but they couldn't stop. "Not yet. We're almost there," Ethan said, voice low. Xyra nodded, her breath shallow as they moved across the bridge, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the noise of the rushing water below. But even as they crossed, a shadow loomed over them. The unmistakable hum of energy weapons echoed through the air, followed by the sound of boots pounding the pavement. They were being followed. Ethan spun, grabbing Xyra's wrist and pulling her off the bridge and into the cover of the trees just beyond the path. The enforcers were closer now, their voices growing louder. "I told you we couldn't wait," Xyra hissed, her pulse quickening again, her glowing skin flaring with intensity. She felt the urge to fight rising within her, her newfound strength calling to her. But Ethan's grip on her arm tightened, pulling her back. "Don't," he whispered urgently. "We need to keep moving. We don't stand a chance if we fight here." Xyra swallowed hard, her jaw clenching as the adrenaline surged through her veins. She didn't want to run. She wanted to confront them, to show them that she was more than they thought, more than they could control. But Ethan was right. They couldn't risk it. Together, they melted into the darkness, moving swiftly through the trees. The sound of the enforcers' pursuit grew louder, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. And just as they reached the clearing ahead, the safe house in sight, Syra realized that the chase was far from over. It had only just begun. The revelation. The safe house was a small, unassuming structure nestled on the outskirts of the city, far from the bustling market streets where danger had been closing in on them. It wasn't much, just a single-story building with a creaky wooden door and dimly lit windows. But it had been a place of refuge for Ethan on more than one occasion, and now it was their last chance at survival. As they entered the house, Syra hesitated in the doorway. The walls were bare, with only the faint scent of dust and old wood hanging in the air. Ethan immediately went to the small, cluttered kitchen area, setting down a worn satchel that had carried their provisions during their escape. He turned to Syra, who was still standing motionless in the doorway, her glowing eyes scanning the room as though searching for something, some sign of comfort or safety. "I know it's not much," Ethan said quietly, trying to break the silence. "But it's safe for now. We'll lay low here until things cool off." Syra slowly stepped inside, her footsteps cautious but determined. "It's not about the place, Ethan. It's about what happens next." Her voice had an edge to it now, a mix of fear and something deeper. "The enforcers won't stop looking for me. I can feel it. And I can feel something else. The spices, what they've done to me, they are changing me. I'm not sure if I'm ready for what's coming." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. He had seen the shift in her since the first time she had tasted the spices. It wasn't just a physical change. Her mind, her emotions, everything about her seemed to be evolving at an alarming rate. He wasn't sure whether to be amazed or terrified. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever's happening to you, we'll figure it out together. You don't have to face this by yourself." Syra turned toward him, her eyes searching his face for something, perhaps reassurance, perhaps understanding. "But do you understand, Ethan? What if this power inside me is too much? What if I lose control? The spices, they opened something, but what if it's more than I can handle?" Ethan hesitated, his thoughts racing. He had never seen anyone, alien or human, react to spices in such an intense way. But there was no denying the change in Syra. The spices had unlocked something deep inside her, something her species had forgotten for generations. Whether that was a gift or a curse was still unclear, but the longer she stayed with him, the more it became evident that the spices weren't the only thing changing. "I think you're starting to see the truth," Ethan said slowly. "The spices didn't just unlock your senses. They're bringing back something deeper, something that's been lost for a long time. But the question is, what are you going to do with it?" Syra's gaze drifted to the window, her eyes narrowing as she looked out at the distant skyline. The dim glow of the city lights reflected off her skin, making her appear almost ethereal. She seemed lost in thought, as though she were seeing more than just the physical world around her. "I don't know yet," she said softly, her voice distant. "But I'm starting to understand something I never could before. My people, they locked themselves away from their emotions, from the world. They thought it was safer that way. But now I see, what we lost wasn't just feeling. It was connection. It was the ability to live fully, to experience everything." Ethan stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "But that doesn't mean you have to rush into it. You don't have to embrace everything at once. You can take it one step at a time." Syra turned to him, her eyes intense with a newfound clarity. "I don't think I can go back. The spices, they've opened my mind, my heart. I feel everything. But it's not just the good things. It's the anger, the fear, the longing. I can't shut them out anymore." She closed her eyes for a moment, as though trying to center herself amidst the storm of emotions. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more reflective. "I don't even know if I can control this power anymore. The more I feel, the more I crave, the more I need. And if I give in, I don't know what I might become." Ethan watched her closely, seeing the turmoil in her expression. The spices had done something to her, something that was beyond his comprehension. He had hoped they could find a way to harness it, to use it for good. But now he wasn't so sure. The line between strength and destruction was thin, and Xira was standing on that line. "You don't have to do this alone, Xira," Ethan repeated, his voice steady. "We can find a way to control it. We can figure this out together." Xira turned to him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know if I deserve your help, but I need it. I need someone who understands." As she spoke, a sudden vibration shook the room. It was subtle at first, but then it grew stronger, like a low hum that resonated deep in the walls. Xira stiffened, her eyes snapping to the source of the sound. The window. A flash of bright light flickered outside, illuminating the dark streets for a split second. The enforcers were getting closer. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. They had found them. "We don't have much time," he said urgently, moving toward the window to peer outside. "They're here. They've tracked us." Xira's body tensed, her glowing skin pulsing with energy. She was ready for whatever was coming. But the question remained, was she ready to face the consequences of the power she had unlocked? And was Ethan truly prepared for the path they would both have to walk? "They won't take me again," Xira whispered, her voice filled with determination. "I won't let them." Ethan turned to her, his hand resting on the edge of the window frame. "Then we'll fight, together." As the hum of approaching enforcers grew louder, Xira felt a fire build inside her, a fire she hadn't known she could control. The room seemed to pulse with the same energy that coursed through her veins. Her power had only just begun to awaken, and she wasn't sure where it would lead her. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. The battle for her freedom and her future was about to begin. The final stand. The low hum of the enforcers' energy shields was all around them. Xira could feel it vibrating in her bones, a deep and constant reminder of the danger that was closing in. The building around them felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were closing in. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady and fast, and it was as if the entire world had slowed down in those moments of anticipation. She stood by the window, her glowing eyes narrowing, as she watched the enforcers march in unison across the street. Their heavy boots reverberated through the floorboards beneath her feet, each step sending a chill down her spine. They were closing in fast, and there was nowhere left to hide. They had no time to run, no time to escape. Ethan was moving quickly, gathering what few supplies he could. Anything that could help them make it through what was about to happen. His face was set, determined, but Xira could see the underlying tension in his eyes. He knew as well as she did that they had reached the point of no return. They could no longer run from this fight. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked, his voice low as he looked at her. Xira turned from the window, meeting his gaze. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of fear, but also something else, something raw. She had felt the power awaken inside her, the surge of energy that had built up with each passing day. And now she could feel it even more strongly than before. The spices had opened doors she never knew existed, and she was no longer the person she had been before that first taste. "Unsure," she said, her voice steady, though there was a slight tremor beneath the words. "I can't keep running, Ethan. I won't let them take me. I won't go back to that life." Ethan nodded, his expression hardening. "Then let's make sure they don't get the chance." They moved swiftly through the small, dimly lit house. Ethan grabbed a few tools, while Xira took a deep breath and focused on the energy building inside her. The air around them seemed to crackle with her growing power, and her senses sharpened. She could hear every footstep, every breath, every whisper of wind through the cracks in the walls. The spices had heightened her abilities in ways she hadn't anticipated, and now she had to learn how to control them. Fast. The enforcers were at the door now, their voices low but firm as they prepared to breach the building. Xira could feel them outside, their presence like a dark cloud hovering over them. She could almost taste the fear in the air. But it wasn't just her fear. It was their fear too. The enforcers were used to controlling people, to asserting their dominance. But something about her, something about the energy she now possessed, was different. It was an unknown variable they hadn't accounted for. "They're coming," Ethan muttered, glancing at the door. "We've got one shot at this." Syra nodded, her heart pounding as the realization hit her. There was no turning back now. If they were going to survive this, they had to fight. There was no other choice. She had to confront the enforcers, face them head-on, and show them that she was not the person they thought she was. She wasn't some weak alien that could be captured and controlled. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with conviction, though her body was still trembling with anticipation. Ethan gave her a quick, reassuring nod before heading toward the back door. He motioned for Syra to follow him, but she paused for just a moment longer, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. Syra's hands shook as she reached for a jar of spice from the small collection they had hidden earlier. This one was different from the others. It was the darkest powder they had, the rarest and most potent of all the spices. She hadn't used it before, but she knew it was the key to unlocking her full potential. It was time to push herself to the limit. With a deep breath, she poured a small amount of the dark powder into her palm. The moment it touched her skin, a rush of heat surged through her, the power inside her flaring to life. Her body trembled as the sensation took over, her glowing skin intensifying, turning from a soft shimmer to a bright, fierce radiance. It felt like fire, but it didn't burn. It spread through her, filling her with a sense of control and purpose. "Let's go," she whispered, her voice no longer trembling but filled with a new strength. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the transformation. "Syra, I'm not holding back anymore," she interrupted, her gaze steady. "I'm not afraid of them anymore." Together, they made their way to the front door. The enforcers were mere moments away from breaching it, but Syra was ready. She could hear the lock being turned, the door starting to shake under the weight of the enforcer's approach. Her heart raced as the power within her surged, and she reached for the door, her hand resting against the cold wood. The door burst open just as she released the energy. A blinding flash of light erupted from her body, filling the entire room with an intense glow. The enforcers, who had been ready to charge into the room, were momentarily blinded by the blast, stumbling backward as the light disoriented them. Syra stepped forward, her voice ringing out with a newfound authority. "Stay back," she commanded, her words carrying the weight of something far more powerful than she had ever imagined. "I am not your prisoner." The enforcers paused, blinking against the light, their expressions a mixture of surprise and disbelief. They had never encountered anything like this before. They had expected fear, submission, control, but what they were facing now was something different, something they couldn't easily subdue. Syra's energy pulsed again, sending another shockwave through the room. This time, the enforcers were thrown off their feet, their weapons falling from their hands as the force of the blast hit them. The walls of the room vibrated with the sheer power Syra was unleashing, and for a moment, it felt as if the very air around them was alive. "Do not underestimate me," Syra said, her voice calm but filled with unshakable confidence. "I will not be controlled. Not by you, not by anyone." Ethan watched in awe as the enforcers scrambled to recover, their earlier bravado now replaced with caution. They had underestimated Syra, and now they were faced with the full force of her power. The room seemed to pulse with the intensity of the energy she was channeling, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder just how far she could push herself. For a moment, there was silence, an eerie stillness as both sides assessed each other. The enforcers were not backing down, but neither was Syra. And in that silence, something powerful happened. The threat of force, of control, was replaced by something far more dangerous. Syra's unwavering determination to be free. "I won't go back," she said softly, her glowing eyes locking with the lead enforcer. "Not now, not ever." With that, the final stand began.